Well, hello there. I didn't see you. Much better. My sister, Katie Rose, is just finishing getting her master's degree. And as part of that, she's been researching animal brides. Animal brides are pretty great, in case you haven't heard of them. It's where a man marries a seal, or a duck, or a dog, or a tortoise, or whatever, and they live ever after. There are no promises with animal bride stories, because most of the cultures that created them are pretty horrible. I'm just kidding. I love you, cultures. All of you. You look great. And now, without further ado, Katie Rose.
Okay, which animal bride story do you want me to tell?
The dog or the tortoise one, those are the best.
Alright, let's start with the dog. That's a pretty good introduction to animal bride stories. Okay, so a little bit of background. Animal bride stories usually fall under the Arne-Thompson classification of 402C, search for the lost bride.
And what's an Arne-Thompson classification, Kate?
Well, Annette Arne and Stith Thompson were folklorists. Annette Arne was first, and he did a basic classification system.
Tell that.
A basic classification system that basically allowed people to sort folktales according to their subject matter, and then Stith Thompson came in and did a bunch of work to kind of make it a little bit clearer. Sometimes they're deeply problematic, but they're a pretty universal way of looking at things by subject matter. So these stories shouldn't be confused with like Beauty and the Beast narratives, because those tend to have kind of a different end game. Usually they're happy endings. Animal bride stories make no promises, as Edward said. And I'm going to begin with the story of the dog bride, which is from India, I believe. And it's been a little bit since I read through, so this is going to be a little bit extemp. So, once upon a time, in a plains community, there was a shepherd who would take his sheep out every day and spend all day in the fields. And, you know, he'd come home every night, and he was alone. He didn't have anyone that was his sweet baboo, and he was very lonely. And one day, when he was out in the field, sort of pondering how lonely he was and also how these sheep were incredibly dumb, he noticed that there was a dog kind of walking around the edge of the flock. And it was an unusual looking dog. It was very beautifully patterned and incredibly well behaved. And so he just started keeping an eye on the dog. And he was very surprised when one day he noticed the dog go to the watering hole, slip off its skin, and bathe itself. Now, when the dog pulled off its skin, it assumed the form of a very beautiful woman, and it was in fact the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. An interesting thing about animal brides is that they are always the most beautiful woman that the man has ever seen, and I'm wondering if this has something to do with the fact that they're unfamiliar. The appeal of the exotic, if you will. Anyway, he kept...
Stop playing with your animal bride.
So anyway, he kept watching this dog in order to kind of discern whether or not she was turning into a woman just this one time, or if this was something that would be for realsies. And after a couple of weeks, he came to the conclusion that she was really a beautiful woman under an enchantment, or perhaps an enchantress herself. And so he informed everyone in his community that he was going to marry her. Well, as you can imagine, that caused a bit of an uproar, because self-respecting boys didn't usually marry their dogs. But he was very insistent, and so they brought the dog in from the field, and they hennaed her paws, and they dressed her in the bridal arraignment, and they brought her forward, and she was very well behaved throughout the whole process. They said their vows, and they were married. And that night...
Did she say her vows, or did she bark them?
You know, I think she might have, barked an agreement.
Fair enough.
But it was clear that it was, a consensual arrangement. This is a very important part of the story. The fact that the dog is really willing to go along with the entire concept of marrying the shepherd. And the shepherd is really into her, and everyone else is really worried about it because they think that this is a sign of, mental illness. Like, he's having a psychotic break, he's marrying his dog. This is not okay. So that night, the dog pulls off her skin and becomes a woman. And he's very happy because, you know, he's kind of proven that he has married this chick. And so he takes her animal skin and he burns it. So she's trapped in the form of a human. And so the next morning they go out into the community and everyone sees that she's really a beautiful woman. And they're all really relieved because if he had really married this dog, I think it's kind of implied that someone might have taken him out and hit him over the head with a rock until he stopped making bad decisions. Because this really does affect the rest of the community. So he and his dog wife are very happy together, and she's really beautiful. She becomes a pillar of the community, but it has the unfortunate side effect of setting a bad example for one of the shepherd's friends. Now, his friend thinks, wow, his wife is really great. She keeps a good house. She's really well respected. She's beautiful. She's very obedient. I should marry a dog too. And everyone in the community says, this is a bad idea. Don't do it, man. Like, this is not a usual scenario. But he is really intense. So he goes out into the pastures and he looks through all the different groups of sheep and herds, and he finds a dog that he thinks is very attractive. She's a very pretty dog. And so he decides he's going to marry this dog. So everyone in the community is really not sure how they feel about this. Like, the first time was bad enough, but at least she turned out to be a person. But no one has any guarantee that this dog also is a person because they don't realize there was the whole I spied on her while she was naked element of the courtship.
An important element to any courtship.
It's a very important element to a courtship. You will find this in fairy tales the world over. It's like, we don't have any secrets between us because I am creepy. So they decide, okay, well, he really wants to do this. We're not sure how to stop him. And so the whole community gets together. They prepare the marriage feast, and the women of the community take the dog bride aside, the second dog bride aside, and they try to hand her paws, but she bites everyone. They try to array her in the bridal garments, but she just tears them off and tries to run away. And as soon as they get up to say their vows and to, you know, set up the marriage agreement, she bites the young man and hightails it off, and that dog is never seen in the community again. So everyone laughs at him, and they're like, oh my gosh, you were trying to marry a real dog. It wasn't even like she was enchanted. Like, this was a really poor decision. And he is so embarrassed. He's really ashamed, and he can't show his face in the community. And even his friend who had the successful dog marriage is making fun of him. Like, they all think that he's really stupid. And to be fair, it was a really dumb decision. But after 3 days of this, he is so overcome with shame and so overcome with horror that he hangs himself. And that's the end.
What's the moral, Kate?
I think the moral is don't marry your dog unless you really, really are sure that she is actually a person.
Do the research.
Yes, does she take off her skin and dance in the pale moonlight? If so,
Marry
put a ring
her.
on that. Put a ring on that. Thank you.
So, when he hung himself, was it because he was going through a woof time?